It's recording.
Okay. Assalamualaikum. Peace, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So today I'm super excited. I have somebody on who I've been following for some time on social media, and I've just really admired who you are and your work. And we've been wanting to collab for some time. We're finally getting to it. And so Julius can explain to us exactly who he is and what he does, and then we'll introduce our topic of discussion.
Thank you. Thank you. No, it's a pleasure to be here. Assalamu alaikum. I, I am, what do I do? So the easiest way to put it, I am born and raised in Nairobi, Kenya, right? So I am African born. I've lived a lot of places and I think I've had a lot of definitions that I've had to come to, but I'm finally in a season where I think my knowledge itself is really pure. And based on that knowledge itself, I keep asking, what am I meant to do? And so I think my brand is all about, if you're here to do good, then there's a gift in you that you can use to do that. And I think for me, a lot of times it's words. I love words. and so I use my words to try to inspire people. But it's never me, right? There's a spiritual calling that gets there. So even if I'm making a joke, it might hit, you know what I mean? And by day, I'm a data nerd. So I'm all about how do you take data and use it to advocate for different things. And most of us don't realize we're data points, whether or not we accept it. And then the data tells a story. So a lot of times we hear stories about our people based on data points, like these deficit model framed examples. And I think I got to a point in my life, I was like, nah, like that's okay. The data sounds right, but it's invalid. That's like, I don't define myself that way. And so one of my biggest missions in this season is how do we change the narrative of people of color, and then how to use data to really like make that really real. But it's an honor to be here. And yeah.
Welcome, welcome. So thank you for that, first of all. And you made an interesting point, and that's one of the reasons why I was compelled to work with you, is because you are into the data side of things. And I feel like a lot of us live these traditional lives, and at some point we come to some sort of realization or to some sort of epiphany, and something hits us and we're like, wait, there's more to life and more to our calling. But before I get into that, like, what was that turning point for you, or what was that epiphany, or that moment, if there was, that caused you to say, there's more to life, and there's more to what I need to be doing with my life, or there's more that I need to fulfill?
So I think, I don't believe in gender roles, but I think men arrive at like awareness differently. So for me, it was, I think I started getting in trouble with my free time, right? So all that, what I realized what that meant was whatever I was doing wasn't challenging me. So I needed to do something so I could like maintain myself, my brand, my reputation, because the idle mind will get you in trouble, right? So I know that was like, hey, I need you to get focused on the gifts I've given you, and you're having way too much fun, right? So I was having a great time, and I tell people I learned who I am in the wilderness. Biblically, the wilderness is this amazing place, right? So like we try to talk about it negatively, but for me, it was the most positive place. I didn't have to grow up yet, right? I could just be with God. I could, and on my worst day, there was manna that fell from heaven. God still blessed me. God still favored me. I was battling whatever, demons, giants, whatever. And it was fun because I knew I could win. And then one day, God was like, it's time to grow up. Like, so when some of these battles, they're going to hurt, right?
Yeah.
You're going to be hungry. And that hunger was like, I just wasn't satisfied anymore with what I was doing. So, and then whenever you have that prayer, the answer is never what you think it is. So like, I was like, God, I need to know where I need to go. And he was like, okay, cool. You got to surrender everything that you think that you need to do and just trust me. So it's been a long road, you know what I mean? And I'm finally in a place where it's starting to make sense. And I know outside looking in, it might have looked like everything's connected, but I think my life connected more in the last 2 years than it's been in the last 10 years. But my brand has always looked like it connected, right? So, and that's the power of social media and how we brand ourselves. But
Yeah.
now I'm a lot more open with like, nah, I've had some seasons where it did make sense. And those are the seasons that I miss because you pray differently when you don't get it, right?
Mm.
You pray
You
differently when you
said
don't.
those are the moments that you miss.
Yeah,
Mm.
because it was the most pure time with God for me. Because you can't go to anybody else in that season, right? You can't read a book about it. You can't like God is like, nah, like you got to talk to me, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't use your logic out of it. And you just you live there long enough, and you just have this really intimate time with God. And and when you're removed from that, when God starts trusting you, it's not as intimate anymore, right? Right?
Yeah.
When you're not going through it, when you're not fighting, it's like, man, I missed that fight, right? I missed that struggle. So
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because I remember at a point in my life where I was going through something, and I was actually in therapy at the time, and I was speaking to my therapist, and I was asking her a question. I was asking her about some things that I was going through, and she was telling me like, listen, Ife, it takes those moments of struggle, or those unproud moments, for lack of better terms, where you find yourself the most.
mhm.
Imperfection and imperfection is where you find your perfection sometimes, if you're directing your energy in the right way, if that makes sense.
No,
You know
it
what I mean?
does.
So I get that.
And I guess my
Yeah.
question for you though is like, I know for me, there's always the male privilege of it all, right? So like when we
Hmm.
make mistakes, we go through whatever we go
Hmm.
through, society, friends, families, like, he's still finding himself, right?
Hmm.
And I'm
Hmm.
curious for
Hmm.
you what that looked like, because I don't think women are given the same freedom to make mistakes publicly, right?
Exactly. So to speak to that, that's where I was hard on myself, because women aren't given that. It wasn't so much I was just going crazy. It was I was feeling very human like emotions, or doing very human like regular things. I was very hard on myself with regards to that. And she had to explain to me, like, listen, don't be so hard on yourself, and use this moment as a time to really find yourself, and don't see it so much as a downfall or a pit. Look at it more so as a means of connection. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that does take work, internal work. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. So let me ask you a question. So this is the topic of our conversation. I didn't get to formally introduce it, but what does authenticity mean to you? Because one of the interesting things that I find about you is that you live this very traditional life, and then you have this life where you have this artistic expression. And I feel like so many of us feel like we need to have one or the other, whereas I see it as, being human beings, we have a little bit of everything in us, and there's nothing wrong with channeling a little bit of everything. So when did that moment become okay for you? What does that mean to you? I know that's a loaded question,
no,
but
but
yeah.
it's a great question. So
Yeah.
um, the easy version is, it was a failed attempt at trying to fit in, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
I came back to God, whatever that meant at that time. I was like, I'm gonna be a good Christian man. I
Mm-hmm.
got baptized, and I was like, God, I've been living in the wilderness. Now I'm going to walk right. I'm going to look right. I'm going to talk right. Um, and it was really hard for me to do that, right? Because what was authentic to me didn't fit into church places, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I make jokes. I'm funny, even though I'm not that funny. I'm reckless, but it's a healthy reckless. It's almost like this rebellion that I have,
Mm-hmm.
um, that it's supposed to just challenge spaces and things.
Yeah.
And I love revolution, right? So like in everything you go to, you should be able to change a thing. So I got to the church spaces, and I found myself really quiet, right? So I would want to ask questions that made sense to me, but they were not allowed in the church, right? And eventually, but everybody around me was happy, right? So everybody's like,
Mm-hmm.
finally, you're you've matured. You're not moving like you used to. And I remember thinking like, oh, this ain't me. And I would have
Mm-hmm.
these, I used to call them Breaking Bad moments, right? So I'd be a good Christian for 2 weeks, And then like it'll be a Saturday. My homies would call me like, yo, let's go out. I'd be like, absolutely. And I would go and I would have
Yeah.
so much more freedom with old people than my new people. Right. So I'm
Mm.
like, oh, for some reason, and they didn't challenge where I was going. So they'll be like, yo, okay, church boy, you can still party with
Yeah.
us though. And there was like
Yeah.
the way that they received me, regardless of who I was becoming.
Mm-hmm.
So one of my mentors actually gave me a book. It was called Wild at Heart by John Eldridge. And it challenged everything that the church was telling me about myself. It said, everything that you feel is natural. So your desire to be wild, reckless, the fact that you love the wilderness, God wants that in the church.
Mm.
So for you to show up and and I've been like a club promoter before. So if I can influence people like that and just get people live, and then I go to church and I'm like sitting there with
Mm.
my hands, not even moving like I would, then I'm not being authentic, even
Yeah.
spiritually. And so
Yeah.
now when I merge those two things, I was like, nah, I'm a approach God recklessly. Like that's what I know how to do. I'm a love
Mm.
God recklessly. I'm a challenge the church recklessly because I'm not challenging God. You know what I mean? And for me, I'm not doing it because I don't believe the church has. It's just
Yeah.
um, we're called to be who we were created to be. And for
Mm-hmm.
me, I'm a rebel. Like like if you talk to
Yeah.
my mom, she say ever since I was, I don't know, whatever age, I always
Mm.
asked too many questions, right? I always
Yeah.
challenged the construct. And so when I
Yeah.
arrived at that version, then being authentic wasn't a challenge at all.
Yeah.
Um, and so it was actually the book that made it,
Mm.
that normalized it for me, because I
Yeah.
like books to make sense to my life. And there's actually two versions. There's Wild at Heart for men and
Mm.
Wild at Heart for women. And I
Hmm.
think I always tell people, y'all need to read those books, and then
Read
men
both.
need to read
Yeah.
the other one. So you need to
Yeah.
understand that, like, as men, it is a beautiful thing to find a woman with a wild heart.
Mm.
And as women, it's a beautiful thing to find a
Yeah.
man who has a wild heart. But as long as that wild heart is anchored in God, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or however they define God. So.
It's interesting that you say that, and I appreciate that because Islam, we've had this conversation prior to this, but Islam to me is so perfect in the way that it never says it, or it doesn't tell us perfection is what I is what our Lord Allah doesn't tell us perfection is what I need from you.
Mm.
We're told the best of you are those who repent. The best of you are those who sin and repent. So it is very natural for us to sin. It's very natural for us to um, to have humanly emotions and feelings, but to repent and to have a sincere intention to strive for better is what's necessary. You know what I mean? So I felt that one definitely.
No, and then so and I,
Mhm.
when did you find your authentic self? And do you think you're truly living in your authentic self?
I do. I do feel like I'm truly living in my authentic self, but I feel that I came into my authentic self once hardship hit in my life. I felt that ease and comforts of life is not where I felt myself. It was the adversities of life that caused me to question a lot of things, that caused me to become more convicted in my religion, for one, and then more convicted in myself and trust myself more, trust my decisions, trust my authenticity is what we're talking about. But just um, yeah, to me, that's why I'm not going to say I glorify adversity, but I think that adversity is a beautiful thing, especially if you have the right mindset going into it,
Mm.
because you come out with so much more of an understanding of who you are and where you need to be. But with ease, I didn't get that.
So I like that. My granddad, and I know we actually talked about this before,
Hmm.
is a pastor, and I know you have the same connection. Um, he used to always say, like, you need to stop looking at. He used to tell me this: hard things as hard things, but more so things that God trusts us with, right? So it's actually a
Hmm.
trust, like, and then he would say, God doesn't trust everybody with everything, and so if you're being trusted with this, that means God made it special for you. And
Hmm.
it reframed it. So ever since I was young, like if there was a hardship, I would just feel special, right? Like I'd be
And
like,
Islam has something very, very similar to that. And Allah tells us that I'll place no burden on you greater than you can bear.
mm-hmm.
So in the midst of it, that feels like, well, dang, it's like, why am I able to bear this? Or, you know what I mean? But on the other end of it, you grow such a great appreciation for it, because like I said, if you have the right mindset in the midst of it, you learn so much about who you are, and you gain a lesson. So I always say that I don't regret anything. I don't wish to undo anything, because I feel that this point that I am in my life, I'm content with. And maybe not everything, but my mindset is something I'm very grateful for.
No, I could dig it. And you know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's also just building the spiritual muscles, you know what I mean? Like there's the benefit of, you might go through tests in different seasons that you'll have muscles for. And so for some people, it's the first time they're going through that test. And so for you, once you've been through the test, been through the weight of whatever, you know, life is trying to teach you, in the moment it doesn't make sense until you realize that, yo, now I can handle this. In a season where most people can't handle the thing that I already like, I beat that level. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna give you another question. Throw another question at you.
Okay.
Okay. Have you ever been concerned with what your own personal authenticity means as it relates to your relationship with others? Meaning your family, your friends, your loved ones. Has that ever come as like a thought process for you?
100%. And I felt that one deeply, and because I think we learn how to be the versions people want us to be, right? And it starts at childhood, right? So there was versions of me that I would be a certain way because I knew what my mom expected of me. So if you're a smart child, you show up as expected, right? So at my
Yeah.
house, I had to, you know, you had to come, I had to do my homework, I had to get the grades, stand it, right? We prayed every night, stand it. But when I left that house, you know, now I'm in the playground, I'm with my friends, and my friends knew me to be the kid who's like daring people to jump off whatever, like I was the troublemaker who never got in trouble, and my friends knew that about me. Um, as I've grown up, uh, and then there's who we were in class. There's who we were at work, right? And for me, for so long, it was different people. And I can honestly say this is the first time where I'm finally showing up as the same person in all spaces, right? Because I had to arrive at my authenticity. And the crazy thing is, um, you challenge people, but like they eventually just accept who you are. But we
Yeah.
don't believe that. So like for my mom, um, she had a very specific path she wanted me to take because we're immigrants, right? She worked really hard for me not to have to go to college and get debt, this and that. And I chose a different path because I'm stubborn. But I told her like I need to do this, and she was like, I don't understand. You know, we worked hard. You don't need to be broke, right? Right. And then so,
Yeah.
but now that I've gone through it, and she can see that, you know what, you're not showing up in this house pretending to be anything other than you are. It was easier. But for the longest time, we didn't always see eye to eye, because whenever I wanted to be the most authentic, I knew I couldn't go home, right? Like in certain seasons, when I just wanted to like be out there, just do me, I couldn't bring that version home. That's just not how my mama was, right? For some of my friends who knew me as a Christian man,
Yeah.
when I was doubting God, I doubted God in isolation, which was not always healthy.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you go to church, people, you're like, you know, I'm doubting God, and they just hit you with like scripture or sayings, and I'm like, it's not about that, you right? Like I just need you to hear me, like, and embrace that I might be in a doubt season, right? So if you're not being received, you just learn how to be inauthentic. So people ask you how you doing, you know, you just say things like God is good, and that's not authentic, right? Because today I don't think God is good, but I'm gonna tell you God is good so I don't have to deal with you. You know what I mean? So in my relationships, it's been a journey. Is a short.
I definitely, I feel that I resonate with that definitely. So personally, when I've had experiences like that, because I've experienced, you know, my parents, who I love very much, having this very specific idea of who I am and who I should be. And I respect that and I honor that. But I'm like, okay, this, I'm a whole being. So I kind of merged everything all into one, if that makes sense, but really just bringing more of who I am to the face of that. But with my own children, And I have these conversations with my family a lot. I think it's very important to allow your children to express who they are while they're under your roof, so you can direct that
Mm.
and redirect it and give them perspective there, as opposed to them later leaving you and having to figure things out for themselves. So that looks like, for me, with me and my kids, is we have a lot of open conversations, and I don't ever say you're wrong for what you're feeling. I always encourage the feelings, but I'm like, your reaction to it is everything, you know. So my experience as a kid, having my own parents say, do this, do that, causes me to say, causes me to be very different with the way that I approach my own children, you know. And I do want to encourage authenticity in them, but just guide that authenticity, if that makes sense.
No, so it does. So like my mom, and then we also have to realize that our parents only know what they've been taught, right? So
Mm-hmm,
like
mm-hmm,
everybody has learned behavior. So our
mm-hmm,
parents weren't always authentic with us,
mm-hmm,
but they didn't think they could be because they were
mm-hmm.
parents.
They put the best faces on for us, I think, in a sense, to kind of say, yeah. I mean, that's how I felt. That's how I felt, at least. I feel like my parents put their best face on. So how do I translate that? They put their best faces on for us as a means of example, as opposed to a real face on.
No, no, 100%. And I know. So I moved from Kenya to Iowa when I was 11, right? So because my mom came
Mm-hmm.
here for school. Before we left, my grandfather, who I'm named after, told me, "You're the man of the house now," right? So
Mm-hmm.
even that was like, in retrospect, deeply traumatic for 11-year-old boy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't. But we don't talk trauma in our community, so there's no language for that. And then my mom was also going through her version, right? So it was just me and her. We're moving to a place we've never been. She's there trying to like accomplish her last degree. We were on visa, so like she couldn't work a regular job. Um, and I'm in middle school, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't ever remember my mom being scared, being nervous, being afraid. So the only version of my mom that I knew was she's a strong woman.
Mm-hmm.
That's the realest thing. So like no matter what we went through, she always had these like, whatever happens at school, she's like, just get your grades, right? You're getting in trouble because of your grades. And I'll be like, okay, so it's me. Um, it took us a really long time for me to see my mom as a real person, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so I wish we would have done that more, right? Because then I
Mm-hmm.
would have had a language for fear, right? So now as a man, I had two levels of heavy burdens on my mind. So now I'm the man of the house. So even if school was hard, whatever I was going with, like puberty, whatever, like I don't talk to my mom about that, right? Because
Yeah.
we're friends, right? We managing the house.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm uncomfortable in class because I'm being bullied, right? I'm the man, right? I can't go to that with my mom. Like, what do I look like as a grown man telling my mom that I can't handle these kids? So I'm gonna figure that
Mm-hmm.
out. But if I would have had a language like, "Yo, mom, today, um, I was scared in class, right? Today, I didn't feel
Mm-hmm.
like I belonged in this room.
Mm-hmm.
Today, my
Mm-hmm.
teacher made me feel like I didn't belong, right?" And so I have language now that I only know because now I'm being authentic with self, right? But I
Yeah.
also now appreciate my mom more because she didn't always know what she was doing. She just made it work. So like now
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I love her even more because she was a gangster for that. But she didn't need to always just be the perfect mother for me.
Mm-hmm.
I would have
Mm-hmm.
received her equally if she was like, today we don't know how we're gonna pay the bills, right?
Yeah.
Today we have to go to somebody else's house to get this meal, right? Like,
Yeah.
but it was never that conversation. So,
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And I mean, if you don't mind me adding to that, but on the flip side of it, there was a sense of security that she gave you by sacrificing not showing that emotion, if that makes sense.
yeah.
You know what I mean? So there's certain things that you did not have to worry about because she was sacrificial in that way.
But
You
I could
know?
feel it, right? Right. So
Yeah.
if you're intuitive children, like our children always feel what we're not telling them.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have
Mm-hmm.
to worry, but I felt
Mm-hmm.
something didn't add up, right? Remember, I like numbers, so she would say things, but her poker face wasn't always there. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so you talked about therapy. I remember one time, therapist. She was dope because she would ask me these questions that forced my brain to think differently. And the question was, "When's the first time you know your mom lied to you?"
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, um, and it stuck with me. And then she was like, "Well, why do you think she did?"
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and I think parents lie to their children to bet like for their best interest, right? But
Yeah.
children always know when you're not telling them the truth, right? Because we're
Mm-hmm.
spiritual beings.
Mm-hmm.
And so that whole interaction, after I remember after that I replayed and I'm like, wow. So now I push for truth in all my interactions when I feel like a lie is being told, and even because everybody thinks they're benefiting you, and sometimes I'm just like, yo, for me, honor me with truth. So even in relationships,
Mm-hmm.
I push for truth. Like it's not always gonna feel good, right? It's
Yeah.
not always gonna make you feel secure,
Mm-hmm.
but you could work with truth. You can't
Yeah.
work with what is meant to make you feel good. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That whole honesty bit.
yeah. And do you think you've
Yeah.
had to lie to your kids every now and then, or and maybe not lie, but like
Do I feel like I've had to?
yeah,
I try to be very honest with them. I may manipulate the truth, but my kids are so intuitive because I feel like I've set them up to be that way that if I tried, they could call me on it, you know? So I try to be very diplomatic with what I tell them, but honest at the same time. You know what I mean?
and I think that those are the children that we should be raising, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
there's a intuitive and a critical lens that we teach our
Mm-hmm.
children to grow.
Mm-hmm.
So in any situation they go into, their spirit will tell them something, but they
Mm-hmm.
should feel comfortable enough to ask, but they should also know when to ask, right? So there's like literally levels. Because when I was young, my intuition would kick in, but I would just be like, boom. And now, like in a room full of adults, they would say, this is adult conversation,
Mm.
right? And but I had to learn that, right? Community taught me that, and so I would be silent. And then after the fact, my mom gave me the avenue. I would ask her like, so she would be like, so what was your question that was so pressing? And I would ask her, and she would tell me, but there was an order to that, and I would
Yeah.
learn like sometimes adult conversation is not for us.
Yeah. 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 I get that. I definitely get that. There is definitely like a space of appropriation with regards to the conversations, but I do feel like I want to elicit the most authentic part of my children right now while they're with me, so that when they have to deal with life, they're prepared to deal with it. You know what I
So,
mean?
but now I have a question though, because I
Mm-hmm.
know you have both boys and girls. How different is it to hone spirituality between boys and girls? Do you see a difference? Right, because I know my mom is an angel. I challenge my mom, right, in
Mm-hmm.
ways that I know, like my female cousins never challenged their parents, right? There was
Mm-hmm.
just some there's just something about boys that's authentically us,
Mm-hmm.
but also just stubborn, reckless, and will take the long road. So I'm curious how you foster the same level of spirituality.
And the boys as opposed to my daughter.
Yeah.
My daughter is younger than the boys, so our conversations are a bit different. Um, but I try to be as equally transparent in the way I speak, because it's all about, for me, transparency. I try to keep like a certain level of transparency. So the same level of transparency that I give with my boys, I give to my daughter. And I do want my daughter to grow up with a sense of a voice. So I allow her to speak what she needs to speak. Of course, like if there needs to be correction, I'll give correction, because I do greatly believe in respect and context. But I do believe in like transparency 1000% to the point where I grew up in an environment where it's certain things you just don't say. So when I hear those things from my kids, like those topics that may be taboo, because I have fostered that certain level of transparency, and my stomach, I'm like, what are these kids saying to me? But I keep that to myself and we just have the conversation. But I try to be, like I said, as equally transparent with my daughter.
No, that's dope because
Yeah.
there's always a bias and we don't even realize it
Mm-hmm.
in society and parenting and relationships and at all levels.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then for you, I guess the next question. So who informed your spiritual sense of self? Right?
You said who informed it?
Yeah, like was it yeah, how did you arrive at that? And was there a parenting element that helped just hone in who you are spiritually?
My father definitely raised me to question everything. But he also was no games when it came to respect. So as a kid, I didn't ask a lot of questions, but because he instilled that in me as an adult, I've always had a curious mind. I guess you can add to that that I have my own curious personality, but I am quite analytical and I do like to know a lot. Like I feel like I'm like I just like to suck in information. I read a little bit about a lot, right? So that curiosity for just like who I am is what opened that up. But more specifically, just adversities or things that came to me. I never sat with it. I'm always just reading and just trying to pull information and just reading and just trying to pull information. So I guess you could say my father set the tone for that. But then me and my quest for answers about myself is what kept that going. Yeah. Did I answer your question?
No, you did, and because for me it was my mom who set that tone, but I've been having this internal debate, like one, if duality is the standard, right? Like man and woman were meant to be
Mm-hmm.
co-creators.
Mm-hmm.
Then is it an equal responsibility to speak spiritual life into our children, right? Like who's because I think in African culture, like we always give different roles to different people. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, I just had a grandfather who was a pastor, but I always wondered like if every household has women who are teaching their children about spirituality, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a huge deficit, at least in culture in general, where when you go to spiritual places, you don't see children and men having
Mm-hmm. You
spiritual
see
conversations.
children most. Okay, I see. Okay, so I guess your question is like, how did that work?
Yeah, or like
Yeah.
not how did that work? Like, is there a purpose in both? Is there something that a woman can teach children spiritually that
Mm-hmm.
is different from what a man can teach children spiritually?
I think that also ties into from my own personal experience. I think that also tied into me not looking at things in traditional ways, because although I feel that my father was very traditional with the way that he raised us, he was very emotionally available. So he was the one who more so said, okay, well, you know what, let's have these conversations. Or he was the one that did homework with us, and he was the one that like I said, taught me to ask certain questions. And my mother was she was a little less that way, I guess you could say emotionally available, but she was also very traditional in the fact that she was like, she cooked, she cleaned, she did everything else. But my father stepped in so many other ways. So that, I guess that set the tone for me. That set the tone for me to look at things in a non-traditional way. It taught me that you can be traditional, non-traditional at the same time, and there's nothing wrong with it. You know what I mean?
No, but that level of exposure is powerful because once
Yeah.
you see that a man could be the head of the household, but also be emotionally available, then you
Mm-hmm.
can expect that in relationship, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you can look for that, and you can you have a baseline of what that looks like. And I think um, because that emotional availability is once again, I guess the question would be, at what point do men learn to be emotionally available, right? Because we don't have a lot of spaces that foster that specifically. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And have you ever turned to, and we kind of talked about this, and this is like a topic of a future conversation. Um, how have you viewed spiritual women in spiritual texts? Like, have they helped you hone in on who you are as a spiritual woman?
I have. And there's this book that I read, this great book called The Great Women of Islam.
Okay.
And this is probably one of the best books that I've read as it relates to spirituality and women in realism, right? Because I feel like a lot of the social expectations that are put on women are unrealistic because we can be very logical, we can be also very emotional, and there's really nothing wrong with that. It's just a matter of who it works for and who it doesn't work for. So Prophet Muhammad SAW is one of the greatest men in the world as far as example. And he at this, so he was married to his first wife and for a duration of 25 years. And that was his only wife at that time. After she died, he married um, other women. And so one of the first women that he married after she died was named Aisha, and she's promised Jannah, she's promised paradise. And the most beautiful thing I read in that book is Aisha had such a real personality. She questioned things, she had attitude, but she was also still very spiritually connected to her Lord. And um, as a child, didn't read so much into that, but as an adult reading into that, it taught me that there's really nothing wrong with a woman being a woman and having very real emotions. And it doesn't mean that in the eyes of Allah, God, that you're anything less. As long as you're understanding that everything you do may not be correct, but still honoring that that's an emotion that's very real and it's going to come to you. You know what I mean? So that was something that really set the tone for me with regards to accepting, you know, my own self and being completely okay with a lot of the emotions that I feel.
I think so. One, I think that's dope because one of the things I remember one of my mentors was saying, like, strength should never scare you, right? Somebody's
Mm-hmm.
strength,
Mm-hmm.
but we always but we miss that. So for men, a strong woman, right? If you're anchored in your strength, doesn't disrupt your masculinity, right? It doesn't scare anything.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then people questioning something, if you have if you're anchored in definition, a question is just a conversation, right? But
Exactly.
sometimes you question people who don't have anchor, so you're disrupting their whole way of being.
Mm-hmm.
So you're asking
Mm-hmm.
them questions they've never thought about, and so they're looking
Mm-hmm.
at you with immediate, just like, yo, it's like, yo, why would you do that? And what they're
Mm-hmm.
really saying is,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a proper foundation, and you just
Mm-hmm.
disrupted everything with one question, right? And
Exactly. Exactly. It- that is something that I feel like I've said 1,000 times, and it might have even come up in a conversation where I've said to someone that I may have been like in a in a disagreement with. If you were truly convicted in what you felt, you wouldn't feel intimidated by what I'm saying.
mm, see,
You know.
yeah, that's a word right there. Yeah.
But if you feel a little shaky in that and you're having some insecurities in your thought process, or if you don't even understand how you've come to that thought process, you're going to be intimidated by what it is that I have to say, you know.
And and
So
and,
yeah.
and you know, I want to honor that by saying I think I remember times in my younger self
Mm-hmm.
where even in relationship when I didn't understand something and I was questioned about it, I just felt like, like men have pride, right? So we lead our pride and our ego. We hear it as, now you're coming from my ego.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're attacking like who I am. And that's never what it was, right? Even in relationship, I know when you have conversations about finances, right?
Mm-hmm.
Say a woman got it
Mm-hmm.
together, she got her everything together, and she asks you something as simple as, do you have a budget?
Mm-hmm.
for a man, if you're not there yet, you just like, yo, I mean, what you trying to say? Like, what budget? Like, I mean, I'm good. I got mine, right? But
Yeah, yeah.
the sis is probably just like, nah, like, and if you're not strong there, I can help you, right? So we don't even, sometimes in the conversations where the question comes up, we don't view it as an opportunity to build, grow, and there's a strength that you can learn from. It's if I don't have that strength yet, then something I'm not good enough. There's something that I can offer,
Yeah.
and I've watched that so often for myself in relationships, all of that. Um, but it's understanding your strength, and I know it took me a really long time. Just so even like I'm actually going to read this book about the great women of Islam. Um, we don't teach great women. We don't lead with that in like most spiritual texts. But the foundation of every spiritual text is actually women, right? Like I remember when I had that epiphany, I was like, yo, patriarchy is real, right? Like, so this whole respect culture, if we literally trusted women as the original spiritual beings, like, and I'm not straying away from anything, but just like completely within the text, like women are creators, like by definition.
Yeah.
If God trusted, going back to our original conversation about trust, women to carry creation,
And then foster that creation. Yeah.
as men, we should lead with like, yo, like anything she says, I have to honor, right? Like everything that she is, I have to like just embrace because this is a creator that God has entrusted. And I've always been fascinated by how that gets missed, right? Like in so many levels of society.
Yeah. And that's a whole other that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm just like swiping up because I have 1,000 text messages coming in as we're speaking. Yeah, definitely. Definitely, definitely. Yeah, that's a whole other conversation that I would love to get into, especially as it relates to like feminine and masculine energy and the power in each. I feel like we tend to get so caught up into how can I be more like this? How can I be more like this? How can I stay away from this? Instead of really understanding that your power is in who you are, and your power is in understanding that I offer something just as much as the opposite offers something. You know what I mean? And together we create something better. But if you guys were the same, if you didn't have that give and take, that push and pull, that polarity, where's your growth?
And I love the word polarity. I love the idea of duality, even in self, right? So I think we don't know how to comfortably teach that we have both masculine and feminine energy. And for
Yeah.
a lot of people, that's a hard sell, especially in the church or in faith-based spaces. But if we arrive there, then we can actually then conclude, I can meet your feminine energy because I have it too. And I can meet your masculine energy, or I can understand because it exists in me too, right? So it's not as far-fetched as we think it is to learn how to be emotionally available because we have the capacity for it. The creator already put the capacity of both energies in us. So fostering it, that's our responsibility.
Yeah.
And that's the only way we get to duality. And then for a lot of people, they function out of survival. So I know, and this is a whole other conversation, so I'm not going to go too deep in a tangent. But I've met a lot of brothers or sisters who, you know, their dominant is really masculine or their dominant is feminine out of survival. And I was telling them like, yo, so you might be leading in masculine energy, and I honor that and I respect that. But if that's coming out of survival because you don't have the duality, you don't have the support, you got to really acknowledge that because when the support comes, would you still lead the same way? Would you still feel that this is how you had to be? And a lot of people are like, huh, right? And 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 then yeah, but that's a whole other.
Yeah, that is a whole other, but understand, yes, 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 yes. But also, not even to say but, because I agree with 1,000% to everything you said. Also, just an understanding though, because the only thing that makes that thought process a thought process for other people is to really sit and understand, you know? I was before we got into this conversation, because I know we were talking about some things, and we had a conversation prior to this conversation, and you asked me about self-actualization, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
And before, self-actualization is like at the top of that pyramid, right? But prior to that happening, so many other things need to be met. But for so many people, those haven't been met or understood. So it's almost impossible for them to get to a level of self-actualization. And I don't feel like it means that you have to master it, because I don't feel like anything in life is like 100% all the time. I feel like you come in and out, you dip in and out. Um, but being aware of it, being aware that it's a need, and meeting it to some degree
Hmm.
is the only way that you can come to self-actualization.
No, that's deep, deep. Like I love that because when you even before you get to self actualization, like on that needs, people don't have a ready built language for their deficiencies, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
literally like that, I love that as a way to get to self actualization. You have to be honest enough to say what you need. You got
Mm-hmm.
to know what you don't have. So like if people are just out here saying I want this and that, but they don't have their basic needs met, and
Mm-hmm.
they're afraid to say they don't have their basic needs met, even in relationships. So
Yeah.
people will say, well, I want somebody, I want a partner,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm always like, okay, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
Right. But what they're really saying is I need somebody um, who meets me this desire to provide the basic needs to my family. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can define what a basic need to the family, because even that might be two different things.
Mm-hmm.
Once you literally meet, even in relationship, define all those needs at the most base level,
Mm-hmm.
you can get up to self-actualization together. But most people are
But
like,
let me ask you a question. Let me challenge that a little bit. I was talking to one of my friends the other day, and we were talking about relationships, right? And she was telling me that she feels that, or she was having a conversation with some of her friends, and they were saying that we need to lower our standards, right? When it with regards to relationships, and I completely disagreed.
where do
And
we do that
I explained to her why. I'm like, I would never, I would never compromise on my standards, and I would never encourage my children to do so either. But I said the conversation should be more so us as a people being whole people before we get into relationships, right? So I'm saying that to say, you said you made a point, and correct me if I'm wrong, but being in a relationship helps you to complete those needs, because I think love is like lower down on the pyramid. But I feel like, I mean, that should be self-love,
Yeah.
right? Because self-love is a part of you completing your self-actualization. And I don't think healthy relationships become healthy until you're self-actualized to some degree.
So I don't disagree at all.
Mm-hmm.
And if I misspoke, so I think that pyramid, you should be already climbing up on the pyramid even before you meet another.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What I'm saying is a lot of people are not already climbing up that pyramid.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
people have not already defined for self what love,
Mm-hmm.
what needs, all of that looks like. So they get in
Mm-hmm.
relationships and then they start defining their needs based on what the other person's not giving, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then their needs are, it's just easier to define them in relationship when the reality is you can walk into any situation if you're already climbing up that pyramid and define yourself in a very clear way.
Mm-hmm.
You can say in this season, I've already done the work. Because everybody
Yeah.
uses like these loose terms, like, I've done the work. But
Mm-hmm.
it's I've done the work to get myself to really understand what I need in this season, what I want in this
Yeah.
season,
Mm-hmm.
what my basic needs are. And for some people, it could be respect, it could be trust, whatever that looks like. You should be able to have a conversation about that if you're entering into a relationship with a person.
Mm-hmm.
Not for them to complete it, but for them to have a clear definition of how to meet you in relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Because we
Mm-hmm.
blindly just walk in and we act like we want. people don't want the same things.
And we're not clear on what we need in order to be fulfilled in that situation.
That
Yeah.
part, and what we need to be supported in our growth.
Mm.
Because relationships should be support systems for growth. And all that means is I'm already growing. So if you're going to enter my life, you're either speaking life into it or supporting my growth. And if you're not,
Then
this
it's just
isn't
not
healthy.
gonna work. Yeah. Yeah.
And so because people haven't not already defined what growth looks like for them, people just, oh, you're cute, boom. Now you're in there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such an intimate thing to let somebody in your life. But
Mm-hmm.
growth, progress, boundaries are healthy words. So I don't
Yeah.
believe you should lower your standards, but well, period. So let's go there. I don't never lower your standards, but you should really know what your boundaries are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah. Whew, I feel like we can go into that one all day long.
that part.
But let me ask you one other thing, and then um yeah, we'll talk after. But okay, so what advice would you give to someone who's struggling with authenticating themselves, or struggling with showing up as their real self as it relates to maybe threatening their relationships, or threatening their relationship with their parents, or just making them feel really insecure or isolated once they've come to whatever that means for them?
So interesting question, and I forgot the anchor in this with authenticity. So thank you for bringing us back.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the what I usually challenge people to do is you got to define two things: home
Mm-hmm.
and family, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because both of those spaces ideally should be safe spaces that foster authenticity. And if
Mm-hmm.
they don't, that's where you start, right? So you got to go back to childhood and remember the last time you really felt like seen, heard, and encouraged. And for all of us, we can all go to the original. Our genesis is that family, right?
Mm-hmm.
Think of people who always saw you, and what was it about that experience that allowed you to be that person? So that's the starting point. And then the second thing is, what does home mean to you, right? Because home is not about a person, but wherever home is, it should be the most authentic place for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like when you get home, are you really authentic with yourself? No audience, no anybody. And
Mm-hmm.
what would it take for you to be authentic, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, whatever, like you just arrive at home, and are you authentic with yourself at home? Because if you're not authentic with yourself at home, or if you're not
Yeah.
authentic with yourself at family, it's gonna be really hard for you to like really take that out the house, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people have performative authenticity, and I'm like, yo, even before you start performing, define
Mm-hmm.
authenticity for self.
Yeah.
I said that every day. Learn how to love you at home, nobody's looking, flaws and
Mm-hmm.
all. And then once you get to that level, every time you walk out, there's nothing that will be challenged out there that you have not already confronted in there. So
Mm-hmm.
challenge your insecurity, challenge your doubt,
Mm-hmm.
challenge
Mm-hmm.
all the things that
Mm-hmm.
are scary, right?
I'm sorry, I'm just like, it's a
God, yes.
matter of, yeah, you have to be able to address those things first.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That's why we're afraid of people seeing things that we
Mm-hmm.
don't think are visible.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then
Mm-hmm.
so we build masks around that. So we show up and like, okay, I got this thing that I'm hiding, so I'm gonna put a mask off that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But imagine me like, you know what? Whatever you see, I've already told you.
Yeah.
Right? Whatever you see, I've already shared. Whatever you see, I've
Mm-hmm.
already told to the world.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so now what? What you gonna say, right?
Yeah.
And I
It's
think
true.
that's step one is showing up authentically in the way Lauren Hill, right? Because I think her whole Unplugged album
Mm-hmm.
is her redefining self and getting to
Mm-hmm.
authenticity, right? Like she was
Mm-hmm.
so raw, and so I think to me she defines authenticity because she's just embraced that she's an imperfect being.
Yeah.
But she has a quote that I love. It's how beautiful is fruit in denial of its roots, right? So even in your definition of
Mm-hmm.
authenticity, there's a root beginning that defines the fruit that you show up as, right? So you can't deny your fruits. So part of being authentic, and I started with family, is acknowledging where you came from. Like literally, like all of that
Yeah.
defines you. Like if you got that father, mother, uncle that you might not want to share in public, you got to change that, right? Like that
Mm-hmm.
too is a blessing. That is part of your
Yeah.
identity. So
Yeah.
starting at that
Yeah.
and saying, you know what, I'm gonna own everything.
Everything about you, because it makes you who you are. And as long as you're proud and okay with who you are at that moment, then everything up until that point cultivated you in a sense. You
Yep.
know? Yeah, I
And
get
it's
that.
also you seeing and honoring those people. So the more you see and honor the people that, or the things that you might be like, I don't know, the easier you can show up and be that person to other people. And the
Mm-hmm.
more authentic relationships you have based on
Mm-hmm.
no judgment, no guilt, no shame,
Mm-hmm.
will allow you to continue to be authentic. Right. So
Yeah.
it's like you become, you give, and it grows.
Yeah.
Now you're bearing a very different kind of authentic fruit. So
Mm-hmm.
that's my long, unnecessarily deep answer.
I get that. I get that. I feel like one theme that we've come to many times in this conversation is really, and maybe you can have some, you have another perspective to add to it, but know thyself. And that's one of my favorite quotes of all times. And it's such a simple one, you know, it's such a simple one, but it's such a profound one because it takes so much to get there. But knowing thyself, and you pointed to it a few times, or you've brought up the idea of going back to childhood, right? So going to the base of who you are, and then understanding different aspects of where, how and where you've come to where you are, and knowing ultimately who you are. And then at that point, once you know who you are, you're okay with showing up authentically.
No,
Yeah.
and I love that, and I know we're over an hour, so I'm gonna just drop one more gem. So like in there's spiritual mathematics, the 5% of logic, right? And everything is 1 to 9, but 1 to 3, knowledge, wisdom, understanding. Um, so that knowledge itself is supreme, right? Like you can't
Yeah.
start any conversation without a base knowledge, but that
Mhm.
wisdom is what you eventually learn about your knowledge that you didn't know back then.
Yeah.
But none of that means anything without understanding how to apply it daily, and not to just to self, right? So when you get to that level of understanding, understanding is a shared mathematical principle. So like that's why a lot of things happen in threes, right? The Holy Trinity, this and that, this and that. Your understanding exists in connection with people, right? So
Mm.
that is a lot of people got that knowledge and they got that wisdom for self. But if your self is not being applied to the people around you, you haven't arrived at understanding,
Mm.
right? And even if
Mm.
people do not understand you,
Mm-hmm.
you can still show up and still be anchored in that knowledge and wisdom. You know what I mean? So that lack of understanding from outside doesn't challenge it. But your ability to understand their lack of understanding, that's a whole, it'll bring you a whole different level of like, it's more than wisdom. And that's the most authentic place you can arrive. Because it's not a battle. And that's why, it's all mathematics, hashtag most deaf.
I'm still arriving. First of all, I digested all that, and that was like that was definitely a gem, a whole other perspective. But I have to understand the mathematical part of it. But I feel like that's probably what's helped you to understand so much, because you do have that mathematical aspect of things. But yeah, wow,
But it's also hip
that was
hop,
deep.
right? So spiritual mathematics, like the cipher 1 to the 2, 3 to the 4, it was always based on mathematical spiritual
Mm.
concepts,
Yeah,
right? And I think
yeah.
we get out of our Africanness, we get out of our mathematics, we get out of all of that, and then we try to operate in this other type mentality. And I'm like, yo, we're musical, we're hip hop, we're numbered beings. But so with that, yeah, I'm excited for the next topic, whatever it is, spiritual tea every Sunday. Um, and I thank you for this opportunity. So I don't know if you have lingering anything, because I know your brain, I see it. You're doing
Yeah,
jumping.
it's going. First of all, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you like delving into this topic with me, and thank you for your perspective and your good energy. I really do appreciate it. Perspective was just like right now, but thank you. I appreciate that.
And I receive it, and
Definitely
thank
do.
you. You know what I mean? It takes two. And I'm excited for future conversations. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess we'll be saving this one and sharing with everyone else, and then hopefully we can kind of open up the conversation for something else, because we do have like a lot of other subtopics that we just dropped here. So we'll delve into that later. But we'll sign off now. All right.